So welcome back. This is part 3 of the animation Blender series I have going. And in this part, we are going to actually begin animating. And what we're going to animate is a very rudimentary set of animations, if you will. And that's going to be a reload, a draw, so actually pulling the gun out, and then a store, so putting the gun away. But before we start with that, we need to get our origin pose. So you can see down here, I'm just going to move this panel out of the way so we can actually see the stuff down here. We have our first kind of animation panel profile called origin. And within the animation panel, much like in the viewport, middle mouse allows you to move around, and here middle mouse also allows you to move around. And then much like the viewport, you can use G to move keyframes. You can shift select to move or do other things to keyframes. You can also control click. So the control click is wherever your kind of animation panel cursor, I guess, you can control click to the side of it, and that will select everything that is to the side of it. So I can illustrate that better by selecting these, and you can shift D to duplicate. So that'll duplicate all the keyframe selected, and then to illustrate the control click. So if I deselect the stuff, control click to the right, selects everything that's to the right of my line. Control click to the left of the line, selects everything that's to the left of it. So that'll just make it easier when we're working with it and want to select a lot of stuff. So in terms of deleting, so whatever is selected, I'm pressing X, and then delete keyframes. We'll delete the keyframes you have selected. And then let me kind of explain what each of these kind of dots represent. So in our rig, you see that we have a box for a lot of parts, and that's the bones for each part. So we have bones for 3 parts of the thumb, bone for the wrist, things like that. And these are represented in here. So, and a lot of them are abbreviated, so you have right, and IK is inverse kinematics, and that's just like animation, 3D animation stuff. Then you have your right middle finger, the 3 parts, and other stuff like that for all the thumbs, or excuse me, for all the fingers. And so that's kind of just a brief outline of that. And then this fake user thing, this is how you save actual actions. And then next to that you have the new action, which just duplicates whatever action you're on. So, and then this here will open up all the actions you have, and the F next to it means it's fake user, which is just means saved, which is that shield icon. So you can see it's glowing up here because it's selected, and that just saves the data. So we're just going to delete this one by doing that. Okay, and then before we set up our origin pose, excuse me, I missed a part. So each of these dots represent all the location and the rotation for each part at that time point. So for left thumb tip, so the location, the rotation, as well as the scale, but we're not playing around with scale, so that doesn't matter too much, is told to be here. Like that data is located here. Say if we move to frame 4, moved it like that. Oh, excuse me, that's left thumb tip. I was like, where is it? It's right thumb tip that we moved. You can see that the location data is here for us moving it. And then you want to make sure that this is clicked. This is auto keyframing. And this just tells Blender to interpolate our data from like this point to this point. Because here we have this location, and then by frame 4, it's told to be here. So what the computer does is it tries to fill it in frame by frame of how to get there. So I'm just going to delete that. Okay, so we want to set up the left hand holding the gun. So we're going to move it over, and then the kind of shoulder is also linked to it. So if you're not able to move it, you want to move it so that you can actually get a range of motion. So I'm just going to do some rough stuff. Rotate it like that. And a lot of this, once again, is just playing around with it until it looks the way you kind of want it to. So, just getting a rough hand around it. Looks alright, and then I'm going to do the trick where you select middle, index, and ring, and you have your individual origins set. And then we're going to do the curl. To make it easier. So then you can fix some of the clipping issues. Get. And then you see that I'm double clicking a lot of the axes, because most of the time that's what you want to do, because it would have the same effect if it was in the same orientation as the absolute axes, but normally because you have rotation and things like that, you're going to want to do it on the local axes so that your hand's actually moving in a natural way, because if I just did it on the x-axis, or x-axis, in terms of the absolute axis, you get movement like this, which is not what you want. All because of that we've rotated that wrist. Then for the pinky, the method of using individual origins to rotate it doesn't work for this rig, which is not a big deal. So just gonna do it manually. And figuring a lot of this stuff out is just playing with it. As you can see, I'm like bringing that part in, realizing it's too far in, bringing this out, rotating it the other way. So just play with it. If you want to really figure out and get a handle for this, it's just playing around with it. Then I want our set our thumb up. Looks kind of natural. So just a lot of playing around with it. You can see I had it all set up, but I realized it wasn't close enough to the gun. So that's what I mean by playing around with it. Just, you'll set up one thing, and then you'll realize it's not exactly what you wanted. So, just play around with it a lot. But because I had it set up one way before, and now I rotated it again, I'm gonna have to move all these things in so that the contact nicely. Oops. See, this is what I was talking about. You accidentally mess up this, you don't need to. Camera, so just numpad 0. Brings you into the frame. So actually that wasn't me messing it up, that was me zooming out, so. Good to know. And this is not too good of a setup, but it's good enough. But you can like just keep playing with that, like essentially infinitely, until you get it where you want it. And actually I'm gonna change this. There we go. You're not gonna see this anyways, but I like to make it set up how it would actually be. Okay, now this is the part where we want to set it up so the camera is seeing what we want it to look like. So select your main bone, and because everything's kind of parented, or not, excuse me, that's constrained to it, you move the main bone, everything essentially moves. So just gonna move it back so this is closer to the camera. And then another good rule of thumb is when you're setting up your weapon, you want it to be under the horizon of this axis, because otherwise it kind of looks silly if it's like that. Move it this way. And then you can fix up the shoulders. That doesn't look crazy painful. And then once you get that to place that you like, you have your origin, and then before we do anything else, we want to keyframe all of our bones, because as you can see in here, the main weapon bone got keyframed because we moved it around and changed its position data, but the other bones are not. And you want that to be consistent, because if you have an animation where you bring up the gun and the slide is all the way back, but you don't have it keyframed here to tell it to be closed, it's going to be open at places that you don't want it to be. So to do that, you select your bone, you press I to insert a keyframe, and then we're just going to do location and rotation to be the things that we're specifying the data of. You can do location, rotation, and scale, but unless your animation is going to have you changing the size of things, location, rotation is good. So that keyframes our slide, and then we also want to keyframe our magazine. So I, location, and rotation. So now we have our main, slide, and magazine, which is what we want. So this is our origin pose. So this is where all our kind of animations are going to either start or end. So from here, we do a new action, which duplicates our origin pose. And we're going to call this store. So this is going to be the animation putting it away, because out of all the 3 animations we're going to be doing, this is the easiest one. And I mean this is the easiest one in terms of it's the least kind of amount of stuff you have to do for it. So we're just going to set this to 10 frames out just to get a rough start, and then we're going to move this and set it to a way where you'd kind of draw it, like holster it. Now we're just going to drag that off screen. And then we're going to see how that looks. So you can speed it up by playing with the timing, like how quickly, like the difference in frames between the start and the end. So yeah, that was good where it was. So, and then along with that, we're going to make it so the hands can actually reach the gun. That looks good. And just play around with that. And I think we're pretty much good for the store animation. So, so I mean by it was easy. If you're doing a simple store like that, which is what we're going to do for the sake of this tutorial. And then the next thing that we want to do is the draw animation. So actually pulling the pistol out from off screen to on screen. And I forgot to fake user, which is to save it. Oh no, actually I did. I just didn't realize it. So the thing with the draw animation is that the origin data that we have here is what we want to be our last frame, so to be at the end. So I'm just going to control click all this to the left and shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to put it into the negative area. And the negative area won't play in the animation because it starts from 0. But after you've made the draw animation, make sure to delete any points that are in the negative, because once we start putting these little animation blocks into the NLA editor, the non-linear animation editor, it will have this data in there. So it will play it out, even though it's not played out when we're just doing it in the animation pane. So save your origin data so that it can all be the same at the end of it. And then, much like the store animation, we're going to have it start off screen. And fix this so actually hold on to the gun properly. And then I'm gonna go 8 frames out or so. In terms of how long you want the duration to be, the way I do it, I don't really have a set rule, but when I'm going action to action, usually maybe like 4 frames out from each part, but that all depends on how quick you want something to be, how big of a movement that action is. So, I don't know, less than 10 frames per movement that you're kind of doing is a good rule of thumb, but there's nothing set in stone for how you should do it or how you need to do it or anything like that. So we're going to move it up kind of like that. And a lot of it's just seeing how does that look. So do it like this, and then our draw animation is going to be pulling it out, cocking the slide, having it go back, and then moving it to the origin position. So this is what this kind of starting animation is getting it there. So and then I'm going to move the 4 frames out, like I was kind of saying, from that action. I'm going to rotate it this way a bit. Move gun back a bit. Just see how that looks. Move it up a little. And go 3 frames. No particular reason. So we're gonna move that 4 frames. Gonna move this up a little more. Should move back a bit. Okay, and then we're gonna have this start to be when we cock back the gun. So whenever you're figuring out the kind of path that your animation follows, you want to think of the forces that will act on it once these actions are done, like thinking of it in real life. So if you were pulling back on the slide, that would pull this gun down this way a bit, as well as kind of apply a torque on it going clockwise. So the gun, when it's being cocked, is going to pull down this way, as well as rotate a bit this way. Because any force that is acting on an object that isn't at its center of mass is going to apply a torque on it. And then once it's pulled back and you let go, those forces are going to be no longer there. So you're going to have a kind of a recoil back. So you're going to have the gun move back a bit and rotate back to where it was a bit. So we're going to start with the pulling back. So we're going to move it down and move it forward and then put in that kind of rotation. We're going to turn it a bit that way. Do it like that. And then we're going to have a bit of a, I guess you could say, lag, if you will, on it. So I'm going to duplicate the frame when it's pulled down, move it over a few frames, and then I'm just going to add some like minor movements to make it not seem so static. That gives it a bit more life and like finishing the pulling back. And then we're going to have the snap back. So this is when he's kind of letting go of the slide. We're going to go 3 frames out, because why not? So a rotation back. Have it move forward a bit. I didn't like that rotation. Oh. So rotate it a bit like this. And kind of rotate it like that. So that's way too fast. And move it down. No, it's too slow. No, it's way too fast. Move it around a bit. So right now it's not getting that snap that I'm wanting. Gonna move that out. So that's better, but it's still very rough in terms of how it's looking. Okay, I don't know why this is here. This is strenuous. And from here we're gonna go 4 frames out. Have it go down a bit. Oh, I think it's too much rotated that way. Yeah, it looks better. And then this is where we're going to have it come back up and go into the origin pose. So we're going to take our main bone data that we duplicated from the actual origin, because we have changed this now that this start is off screen. So you're going to take this, you're going to copy it, and then you're going to put it a few frames after. Let's see how that looks. So it rotates a lot, so we're going to slow it down by bringing it further out. And then that doesn't look too good going from there, so we're going to put an in-between frame. Kind of just throwing in some movement. See how it works. So it's a bit better, but it still looks kind of robotic. I think it's just not high enough. And then that's way too fast, the jump it makes, so we're going to control click to select all the stuff to the right. Move it out a bit. That's a little too slow. And then try to lower this, see what it does. But this is what I mean by it's just a lot of playing around with. It's just changing timings, changing the movements a bit. See how it looks. Okay, and then we're gonna take this and move it over after looking back at it. It's not really getting snapped enough. So we're gonna add a frame a bit after of it, or rotate it down. See if that makes it better. a little bit. Well, that didn't fix it. Let's delete this, see what happens. Yeah, it's a little better now. We're gonna say it's good enough for this. So now we have our kind of general sequence, which is by no means good looking, but you can just play around with this for hours at a time, getting it just right. So now we want to move the left hand, so we actually have the drawback of the actual slide. But before we do that, let's get the actual, let's figure out where, so that's where the slide will start to move back. It'll be held for a bit, and then it'll be let go. So we're gonna get our slide data. We're gonna duplicate it over to where it should be here, right before it starts getting pulled. And where it is to be at its kind of maximum of being pulled. That's when we're gonna go into it. G to move it, and then Z twice to move on that local axis. And then in terms of how far back you go, it's just kind of till it feels right. So once that's over it, so that seems about right. So now pull back. Now it doesn't go back. And we're going to duplicate this part because we added that maintain frame. And this is where it will kind of cock back. A good kind of hotkey to know is that if you do Alt and then a movement key of some sort, so Alt G, it'll set it back to what its original position was. It's like kind of origin position. And then you can do this with Alt R as well, so I'll show you on here. No, that didn't work. Alt R, yep, because we actually changed the rotation of that one. It'll set it to its default rotation. And then you can also do that for scale by Alt S, but usually you're not scaling anything, so that's not too important. So we've set it back, and then we'll see how that's like slow. Yeah, so I think move that up a bit. And we'll see what happens if we move this frame forward. Ah, that looks better. Let's get an actual snap. There we go. But things like that will just like fall into place as you're working through it. So now that we have our actual pull and then release, we want to line the hand up. So you set the kind of position that you want the hand to be at, and then you fill in the kind of in between. So this is right before we start pulling. So that's, we're gonna move our left hand to where we want it to be. So just rotate this, move it back, and then you might be seeing that I'm like changing my view to kind of move to different areas, because if you just press G and move it around, it moves according to your viewport view. So if I want to move it, because from here you can't really move it down in relation to the gun, so that's why I like come around here to move it down like that. So let's get back to setting up the grab. And this. And move thumb out. Get a grab on it. And we're gonna set this up. So we're kind of grabbing with this. All these fingers are like out of the way. Just gonna put this down. Oops, went a little too far. Pull those in. And this is kind of weird, so we're gonna rotate it back. And then in terms of how your fingers actually curl up, you're posed like this. Usually it's like a slant down. So you want to decrease and kind of slant, so you want to decrease each part. Oops. So that you get that kind of slant. That's good enough. And figure out how to get this set up. Whoops. So I'm gonna line it up with the index finger is what I'm gonna do. And then I will have the thumb come into match. So that seems the easiest to do. But once again, this is what I mean by just a lot of playing with it. It's just like, does that look good? Does that look natural? Is that how it should look? So, that playing around idea. To move this up because it was too far back. There we go. Alright, that's good enough. Obviously it's not perfect, there's like very minimal amounts of clipping over here, but you're not going to see it anyway, so doesn't matter much. So now we have our bringing it there, and once again, because the computer interpolates to there, it's not going to look that great because you're going to have that hand just kind of morph through. So we're going to move the hand to the side, kind of rotate it a little bit. Doesn't look as jarring. We're going over to reach it. So, and then we're going to set a frame where the hand's kind of reaching above it. So that it like clasps down on top of it instead of just like your hand rotating over to it. And I'm going to bring this a little closer. So it's pretty rough looking. You could do it where you have the fingers kind of extended out before curling in to grab again, but we're going to keep it simple and not worry about that. So from here, we want the hand to follow the slide. And there is something you can do where you have it influenced, so you have influence over here, and you could set it to no longer the main, but to this slide bone. But the problem with that is there's not really a good way of doing it, and once you turn the influence back on, it kind of goes back to the position that it would have been with all the movement data from the main bone. So the easiest thing to do is just go frame by frame and line up like pick a part on where this lines up and then go next frame, make sure it's lined up. It's tedious, but it's way less painful than trying to do it the smart way, you could say. So, frame 16, where am I going to have my little reference point? So I'm going to do this line of the box, where this kind of striation is, so the second striation from the back. I'm going to have it lined up just a little behind that. So, just a little behind. Make sure it's lined up here as well. So, move it to just behind second striation. Still lined up here, good. Next frame. Line up to behind the second striation. Is it the second? Oh no, I guess it's the third. Just was covered up before. Line up again, just behind. Check here and check that out a little bit. So fix that up. Okay, now it's good from there. So back to this frame. Now let me check the main. So this is where it's kind of maintaining. So I don't really have to move it much. I'm just going to move it a little bit here, why not? And then that's when it's going to start slamming forward. And I'm going to have the hand be somewhere like, come on, there we go. Somewhere like this. I have it let go a little bit. I'll rotate these away. And then we're going to do it so we uncurl a bit. So it seems like kind of releasing. There we go, let's see how that looks. So we're going to move this down. Pull that forward a bit. And then you can see we've kind of got some, like it's no longer gripped onto it. And that's because of there not being us duplicating where we want it to maintain still being held on. So we're going to select all the finger data that we want to maintain. I'm going to duplicate it, bring it to the frame we want it to still be holding on. So the next frame after that is when it starts to go forward, and that's when we want the person to start letting go. And because the hand, this hand is parented to the magazine, it's going to follow it, so that's why you're going to have that weird kind of like wrist following up and like breaking. So just got to play with that. Oops. And then we're going to have our default back to it. So have the hand go back to the grip. So we're going to find where our last slide is. And you want the hand to grab back onto the pistol before it's done moving. So we're going to say it's back on by this point. So it'll move back. And obviously it's just saying it's at this point, and you want it to end at this point, so it just fills it in. So we're going to have clipping that we need to fix. And then same for the the finger data, because we have it set to what it was before and nothing's told it to change, so it's not back at the origin data that we want. So we're going to select all the finger data. And we're just going to paste it. So, and you can see some of the fingers we didn't move, so you just have a continuation. Now you can see it's back to what it looked like in the origin. But now we have to do the in-betweens of getting the hand back to the holding the gun. So we're going to move it like that. Put it down a bit. And we have some clipping there. So rotate it away a little bit. And gonna move this a little forward. And then this should be the hand should be closer to the gun here. So, otherwise it looks like that weird floating hand. So that's not too bad. It is kind of floaty, but it'll do. And then to add a bit to it, we're gonna change the fingers a bit so they don't look as static. So with that, make that out a bit. Do a bit of that. Move that. And now I'll move this up. Just to make it a little more dynamic. Yeah, because now you can see the fingers kind of coming into grasp around it. So it's not the best animation. You can see there. I'm just gonna rotate a bit. Nah. We're going to take some of this data and make it last a little longer. So the hand doesn't look, the fingers don't look as gradual in terms of like changing their position. Oh, something went wrong. I somehow got pasted in. Okay, that's good enough for the draw. Now we're going to get on to the reload. Oh, as you can see, the end animation is not quite right. Because some of these things got moved. Where's the end? There it is. Okay, let's see what's different between the two. Oh, so it's these. This data didn't get set. So we're gonna take this one, this one, this one. We're gonna set that back. So that should be almost the same. So, the upper arm. There we go. So now it will look the same as the origin by the time this finishes. So we'll pull up another origin, duplicate it, call it reload. And we're going to start with blocking out again. So do very rough, very quick, kind of just moving the pistol out. About 4 frames. Turning out a little more. And we're gonna move it up a bit. And this one we're gonna have it pull a bit. Pull on the mag a bit. And then once it's pulled out, that force is going to be gone, so this is going to kind of spring back up. Whoops. Too quick. Back. We're going to move, rotate this a little bit. Nope, that. Go. And we're going to have this move a little bit. A bit. Kind of in between. Put that in the wrong spot. And then we're gonna get it ready for the mag again. And then once you're pushing that back up, it's gonna put a force on it to kind of move it up. Up, and then once that force finishes, you'll have it come back down a little bit due to your muscles kind of resisting it. if we extend it out. There we go, that looks alright, and then we're gonna bring it back to the origin. So from here, I don't know, just like 6 frames out, see how it looks. See if it's too quick, too fast. So it was a little too quick, so I'm gonna spread it out a little more. It's gonna make its way back. Just gonna put a little in between frame, give it a little bit of life. Alright, so that's a very rough block out of it. So this is when the mag comes out. Ready? Mag goes back in. Back to origin. So when mag comes out, you want the hand to be positioned to be taking it out. So we're going to have it grabbing. Grabbing it. Bring it back. Very roughly. Just rotate a little more. Bring this in. Oops. Curl these in. It's a little easier to see. Curl in. Go. And I'm gonna bring this down. The wrist looks less atrocious. Go. So once again, a lot of just playing around, figuring out what actually looks good. And the other thing that might be making this hard is that this is going to be moved out of the way a bit. So there's clipping there, but I'm just gonna do a very rough, not pretty job. So yeah, as you can see, the finger in there is not looking too good. Whoops. To the side a bit. That's good enough. You're not really going to see it too much. So, then that's one meg is going to be out. And then the fourth of that comes off it. So it should be completely out by the end of this frame. And then to move the frame, or excuse me, move the mag out of the pistol so it actually is in line with it, you want to use that local axes. So G and then YY. And then that'll move it with it, but you'll also need to fix the rotation. So, which plane that is. There we go. And we'll have it out back a bit. We'll have it out of the gun. And then as you can see, the hand needs to be readjusted so it can actually have a grip on it. And we need to tell it when the mag should still be in the gun. Actually, here. So it pulls it out. And then you can kind of speed it up or slow it down by how far down this is pulled out. So but if you do that, you have to adjust it as always. And this one, you kind of adjust. Make sure it's actually coming in line with the gun. Actually comes out properly. But we have to move that down because you can see it in frame. And then remember that this is the bottom that you're going to see it, as long as it doesn't make its way into the frame until we want it to. Should be good. So this is when it's going to begin entering. So we're going to bring it back up, adjust it along these local axes, and then because in real life this isn't going to go in properly, we're going to add a bit of rotation to make it seem like he bangs it in first. Add a little more. And then this is when it begins going in, and this is when it finishes going in. So this is when we're going to do Alt-G and Alt-R to have it back to its original place. And then because it's going to be trying to interpolate it back, we're going to stop it from doing that until we want it to start. So maybe that's... So once again, this is like a very bad, gross hold on it. Like it should be further up to here, but For the sake of this, we're going to keep it like that. So I'm not sitting here for 2 hours doing it, because I don't think anyone would want to see that. So, comes out, goes in. It's a little quick as well, but you could play with that. And actual timing. So once it's in, we're going to want it to reset back. And this is, like, once again, you want it grabbing before it's actually back to the origin. So we're going to say we want it here to be back to the origin for the left hand. So Control V, copy it, paste it there. But it's gonna want to move the hand the whole way, which is gonna mess it up. It's gonna interpolate it. So I'm gonna duplicate this. So it doesn't start moving yet. So that's the end of putting the mag in. So that's when we're gonna say it starts to move back. And you can see something's wrong with the arm. Oh, it's because it got rotated too far. So where's that? So I'm gonna copy paste that in as well, so we don't get that freaking out action that was happening. And that's okay, that's good for now. And then we want it to not clip, so I'm just gonna pull it out a bit. Do a little bit like that. See how that looks. So we're going to extend this out a little bit. So we're going to move it as well a bit. So look as rotatey. And the other thing we can play with is the fingers. So that's another reason why this is looking so stiff. So we'll take all the stuff, the finger data that we want to be maintained before we move it. So we want it, oops, these are selected. Just gonna unselect those, okay. And we're gonna move it to right before it starts moving to grab onto the gun again. So we're gonna move this so it all lines up. Okay, and then we haven't set it back to the default finger pose. We'll fix that kind of stiff, unliving look. So we want it back to normal by the time the hand gets back onto the gun, which is right here. Okay, didn't do it. There we go. So that should make it look a little better. It's fast, but it's better. So to kind of fix that, I'm gonna pull this out. There's more time to do it. And accordingly, I can move this stuff and this further forward. Go. So that gave us a few frames more. Which fixes it up a little bit. Okay, and then the other thing that's disgusting is this wrist to fix. Okay, so on the frame, we're going to get our arms. Okay, now stuff is selected, so I'm selecting again. We want it set up so it is the same as it was at the origin. So and let's double check. Okay, that is not. I forgot to set that. That's why it's all the way down here. There we go. Get rid of that extra keyframe. Not that it actually affects anything, but... Okay, so this should look the same as the origin. I'm gonna save this by faking user. Yep, that looks the same. So... we have a very rough robotic reload, but to sake of the tutorial, we're gonna stop it there. So in the next part, I'm gonna be going over how you put all these parts together, as well as adding textures and then exporting it.